Alrighty, so thanks for clicking. This video is just about a bunch of summaries that we're going to do an overview of. So the reason these particular papers, published peer-reviewed journal articles, were chosen is because they've all been published within the past year. This is to show that they are the most up-to-date findings, and as a result, many of them end up being literature reviews instead of actual studies, but they're still beneficial from an academic perspective. These particular papers were chosen not only for their relevance to the subject matter, but also because they display a hint of what it takes, either well or poorly, to observe the general trends in science. I.e., is smoking bad for you? Yes, but the tobacco industry did do its best to say that the scientists are wrong, and actual doctors themselves smoked and believed it to be a healthy habit. The way the industry undertook this was by discrediting the findings of the scientists, disputing every paper and tearing them apart in the public's eye through marketing and addiction tactics. They succeeded for a great many years. If it is fully proven that RF and EMF pose a health risk, the telecommunication industry stands to lose a bit of money. This does not mean that this is what they're actually doing, but the science, when using standard search terms for this subject matter, the number of papers that come up claiming no harm are fewer than those that tend to indicate harm, as seen in this review itself. The search terms are things as simple as RF, or radio frequency radiation, and health effects. Anyone can do this, and we encourage you to do so. And find your own papers as well. You can use any search engine. I prefer PubMed if you're going to be doing that. Google Scholar and Science Direct will pop right up. There are, of course, dozens of search engines available, but university libraries tend to be one of among the best resources for finding full published papers. So, first paper, Adverse Health Effects of 5G Mobile Networking Technology Under Real-Life Conditions. This paper was chosen because it's an overall review of the possible health effects and the reasons behind, and gives reasons for there being the requirement for further research. They state that the current estimates are actually more conservative than probable speculation, so current data is obtained under conditions not reflective of real life. Much of the data that is obtained under real life conditions for exposure, according to this article, display effects. This paper was pretty much chosen because it's exactly what we're looking to discuss here, 5G and its probable health effects. And again, 5G is being talked about a lot more because it is the new technology. It doesn't neglect the fact, it doesn't mean that the previous technologies and previous generations don't have an effect. It's just that this is the new and big scary thing. And even though 5G is probably not going to be as much of a concern, especially in the higher frequency millimeter wave bands, because it's having an incredibly slow rollout and most places don't even have it yet, if they ever will. So, paper 2, towards predicting intracellular radiofrequency radiation effects. This paper was chosen because it uses appropriate calculations that would help with current studies to possibly make them more accurate, and at least from an engineering perspective, more well-rounded and sound. As observing that there are changes possible at levels well below thermal motion is very important to realize, and it's likely due to the magnetic fields that are induced. This means that through calculations we can actually help to fine-tune future studies. And the concern that current studies are not being done in the proper environment isn't that it's from a biological perspective inaccurate, it's that possibly from an engineering perspective it's not necessarily as accurate as it could be, based on reflections and frequency, not being aware of what frequency modulation schemes are available, etc., etc. And okay, so paper 3, effect of 900, 1800, and 2100 megahertz frequency radiation on DNA and oxidative stress in the brain. So chose this because it looked at multiple frequencies and focuses on the brain, which is a very important organ, and a big interest to me, mostly. So 3 frequencies were observed, and they used a more mechanical approach, which is what a lot of studies tend to lack, unfortunately. The EMF affects the hydrogen bond in water, and they tested this on brain tissue, which makes sense as a lot of our devices are actually used at face level, somewhere around here, or directly close to the head. And long-term exposure is clearly where the focus needs to go. However, there isn't exactly time for long-term studies, as a lot of it is already happening right now. So paper 4 is low-level radiofrequency exposure does not induce changes in the MSC biology, an in vitro study for the prevention of NIR-related damage. So MSC is mesenchymal stromal cells. So they are pretty much the last stem cells that exist in the adult body. And NIR is near impact radiation. So this paper is on adult stem cells, and it shows that there is no effect due to EMF radiation. Current studies are producing both findings, however. I personally would have thought that they should use a different frequency. They used 169 megahertz on these cell layers in vitro study. So either tested at like more of a mag field kind of frequency, or at a much higher frequency, so like the 6 gigahertz or something. They observed changes in 3 categories: interaction with no effects, reversible modifications, and permanent damage. Using MSCs, or mesenchymal stromal cells, is actually a really good place to start, though, because of genetics and observing changes in stem cell lines. So paper 5. Trafficking of synaptic vesicles is changed at the hypothalamus by exposure to an 835 megahertz radio frequency electromagnetic field. They also continue to use the somewhat lower frequency range. Most common is the 835 megahertz. The neuronal effects, and there are neuronal effects and at the VGCCs, so voltage-gated calcium channels. It was related to a previous video and talked about by Dr. Martin Pall, which I will post links to both of ours and his video below. Immunotropic effects in cultured human blood mononuclear cells exposed to 900 megahertz pulse modulated microwave field. So I have a few questions about their methodology and the use of their chamber. They admit that epidemiological studies show different results, and admit that this is only one small piece of the puzzle. They did not see a statistically relevant effect. They did this study and they showed that there wasn't relevant results. So they admit that epidemiological studies show different results, and that this study is only a small piece of the puzzle. They preface on focusing on immune function, and that's a very good idea, as there are a lot of microorganisms that are linked to our immune system, and that these microorganisms have been be highly affected by RF and EMF. Exposure time was short, but based on cells instead of the whole organism, so it's probably fine to do that. They have some few good points about RF research as a whole being difficult to quantify. And it is good to have papers that are well written and have a good hypothesis, but it is also important to question what you read. So consider if there are better ways to conduct the testing, and wonder why they didn't do things differently, and then maybe ask them. So paper number 7, global gene expression analysis of E. coli K12 DH5 alpha after exposure to 2.4 gigahertz wireless fidelity exposure. This is where I wanted to talk about the microbiome and the microorganisms. Their hypothesis is that if these cells are being affected, we will also be affected. So we are all connected, obviously, that we may be getting affected through our microbiome and bacteria. There are effects on E. coli, therefore effects could be seen in other or better, good, healthy bacteria to us, leading to mass changes in our and others' microbiomes. Adding to the stress factor that we are not the only things being affected, so we consider plants and animals as well. Imagine if these changes resulted in new viral outbreaks more and more often. I mean, that would be horrible. And in more superbugs, so there would be no antibiotics that would actually be functional. Yay. Okay, paper 8. Radiofrequency electromagnetic radiation induced behavioral changes and their possible basis. So it reflects that changes won't just be to health, but mental health as well. Not just cancer, but ADD, ADHD, autism, a bunch of other disorders that are possible. So many possible mechanisms that could lead to generational behavioral changes. Literature reviews are helpful for determining what studies have been completed more commonly and what their findings were, and that even if individually they often displayed massive effects, overall they may not have statistically relevant measurable changes. Paper 9. 5G wireless communications and health effects, a pragmatic review based on available studies regarding 6 to 100 gigahertz. So, the higher frequency stuff. This is a review of the current studies available and summarizes the overall findings. It does not conduct a statistical analysis on these findings, which would take away from the validity of their findings, but it still has a few very valid points. That consist of a review of which the frequencies were studied versus what was actually available in everyday use. There were more studies done on frequencies from 30 to 60 gigahertz, but these are not in use for the average person. These are like medical frequencies. Medical personnel, however, should be very wary of these. Their conclusive findings of no effect would be unhelpful, like wrong frequencies, no statistical analysis, etc. But not finding a new safety level is totally fair. So they determined that we don't have enough information to set a new safety standard. And there's no way to determine this without specifically doing a study to find the levels that are safe. And then repeat it repeatedly. Paper 10. Funding source, quality of publications and outcome in genetic damage in mammalian cells exposed to non-ionizing radio frequency fields. So, the impact of funding can have on a study and its outcomes can have a massive effect on that. This could be due to some of the sources that have a bit more to prove than others. This is where things get even more political. As soon as you involve money, of course, things get political. But there is no evidence that is what's happening now. However, it's something that you need to take with a grain of salt. If someone declares funding sources, you should probably make an observational note about that. So there have been relations between the telecommunication industry and big tobacco through previous papers. And it's that if it is determined that EMF and RF have health risks substantial enough that people actually care, quite a bit will have to change in the telecommunication industry. The problem is, will we care? We are so dependent on this level of technology that will it be worth it for us to make a massive change? The industry will need to change power levels and possibly frequencies and possibly just go back to hardwired technology. So what will the solution be? It is not yet clear. Thank you for sticking with us. And I will post a link to this summary below. In it you can find all of these papers cited clearly. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to post them below. Don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on BitChute and Library, Instagram, and SoundCloud. Take care and be safe out there.